back to the Motorhome Map podcast. I'm Keith Gooden, and we're here every week giving you the latest tips about motorhoming and caravanning. I ask the stupid questions, but the man with the real knowledge is Motorhome Matt Sims.
Hey Keith, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Like I always say, all the better for being here with you.
Oh, bless.
Today we're talking about 10 tips to greener motoring. But before we get into that, let's talk about you getting in touch.
Yeah, do. We've had lots of people getting in touch, dropping us an email to team@motorhomemat.co.uk, asking us lots of topics that they want to hear about. This is one of them, actually, where people are saying, well, what can we do to keep the cost of motorhoming and caravanning down? So that hopefully that's what we're going to cover off today. But if we can encourage you to leave us a review, we would love that. It helps spread the podcast awareness when people are searching for them. If you're listening on Apple, just scroll down to the 5 stars, give us 5 stars, please. We love getting them, and leave us a comment. And it really helps promote the podcast and spread awareness to the fact it exists. There are so few podcasts for the motorhome and caravanner, and this one is really flying. It's doing really well, and it's been an honour and a pleasure, hasn't it, to do it. Great fun as well. We always have a chuckle, especially off mic afterwards. You should hear the outtakes.
You should. It'll be all right on the night. Perhaps not. Today we're talking about 10 tips for greener motoring. So, Matt, let's start with the first one on your list here. Keeping your weight down.
Yeah, it's a problem with too much cake.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not being personal, are you?
No, I'm not. Well, sort of. I mean, your own weight's a factor, of course, but I'm talking about the stuff that we have in our motorhome and our caravan. Trying to keep that to a minimum. We're going to do a podcast episode on payload and what that is. And we're not going to get into that today, but keep using common sense to keep the amount of stuff you're taking with you is really obvious. And that's going to have a massive bearing on the amount of fuel that you use. Fuel costs have gone through the roof, haven't they? It was in the news yesterday that they've gone over £1.80 a litre. You might be listening to this and think, blimey, that's cheap. Fuel is not going to come down in price. Otherwise, how are we all going to be encouraged to buy an electric car? That's my cynical view, but there's another topic. So watching the weight that you're carrying is really important. I remember emptying an RV that we owned, a big American thing. It was massive. It weighed about 8.5 tons. So it was a huge thing. And we sold it, and I was emptying the lockers, and there were 6 house bricks in the bottom of a locker. And why the heck have we got house bricks? And we'd put them in there. They got buried, but for a barbecue. So we could have one of those little disposable barbecues on the grass without leaving a mark. And we had 6 of them in there, and we'd obviously just kept adding them. So we ended up carrying the house with us, literally. So stupidity, absolutely ridiculous. So keeping on top of those lockers, emptying them out regularly. Do you really need to take that kayak that's got a leak everywhere with you? Get it out, get it fixed and take it, or leave it behind. But bear in mind, the amount of weight you carry is going to have a direct effect on the amount of fuel that you use. So I know that's really obvious, but so often we don't do it, myself included.
Number 2 on our list is driving smoothly. Now, we're all taught about this, aren't we, when we're learning to drive, about reading the road ahead, driving to the road conditions. But, when you've been driving for a few years, bad habits creep in. And you do see lots of people, particularly on the M5 motorway near to where we're recording this, on their brakes. And as Jeremy Clarkson once said, he's never braked purposely on a motorway. If he's come across an accident or something, obviously he has, but he's always driven. We're talking about Jeremy Clarkson here. He's always driven to the conditions on the road and never felt the need to brake. But this one, driving smoothly, this is a key, isn't it? Particularly with a large vehicle.
That's quite a claim on Jeremy's part. I'd challenge that, but anyway, I'm sure we all believe him. So yeah, driving smoothly. So accelerating like mad and then braking as you come to a traffic light. It's just, all you're doing then is burning fuel, and your braking is basically being turned into brake pad wear and heat. So it's not efficient driving at all. And again, this seems really obvious, but I challenge you to practice it and try it. So you mentioned earlier, when you approach a roundabout, trying to time your arrival at that give way line at the roundabout, which means you don't have to stop. You're in the right gear to get onto the roundabout. Now, I trained as an advanced driver and of a car, and then more recently as a motorcyclist, advanced motorcyclist. And this is something. There's a model of driving called IPSGA, which is IPSGA: information, position, speed, gear, acceleration. And those are all. I'm not going to bore you with what that means, but you can go and Google it, and it's really worth reading up on. It's all about taking in all the information around you. So what's happening at those traffic lights ahead? Is there someone stood at that pedestrian crossing? Does that mean they've pressed the button? Therefore, the light is likely to go red. Therefore, you can ease off the accelerator and anticipate that's going to happen and use the engine to slow you down. If there's no one stood there and there are yellow boxes on the lampposts, well, they're probably not going to go red, although you can't guarantee it. They might have run off. But you could probably assume it's safe to proceed at the speed you're going at, being mindful they could go red at any time. And therefore, you're not having to whack the brakes on, and you're not going to be accelerating up toward the light. So it's trying to brake efficiently and accelerating smoothly. And that will make a massive difference to your fuel consumption. Another thing people do wrong going down a hill is they'll be brake, just change up the gearbox or down the gearbox down to second or third gear. And actually, if you let the engine rev, you're using no fuel. Now, that sounds odd, doesn't it? The fact the rev counter's gone up to 3,000 revs. You're not using any fuel. So modern vehicles have an ECU that means they can run the engine without using any fuel from the fuel tank. And also you're not using your brakes. So you're not wearing your brake pads, heating up your brake disc, which then in turn makes them less efficient. So there's lots of driving practices you can adopt. We'll cover a few more, which will make your driving much more fuel efficient and generally less costly.
In the olden days, we used to call that engine braking.
It's still called that. Yeah. Some things don't change, Keith.
Number 3 on the list, getting the gear right. What do you mean?
So being in the right gear. So I see people very often, revving up through the gear range and, they're just burning through fuel. There's really no need for it. Now, I know in a motorhome, you're on holiday, so you're far more relaxed. And motorhomes generally are driven very lightly. And actually, this can be an expense to the motorhome engine. They don't ever get hot enough. And there is a fine balance here. You want the engine to warm up so that the EGR valve warms up and the diesel particulate filter warms up.
What's the EGR?
It's the exhaust gas release valve. So this is a little bit of the engine where the output of the smoke from the engine, let's call it smoke, the carbon deposits they go through this EGR valve and it can coke up and block. And the same with the diesel particulate filter. These are two elements of a used motorhome. The first question I ask of a motorhome that's done maybe 40 or 50,000 miles is, have either of these been attended to, replaced, fixed, service, whatever, because they can go wrong and they can be very expensive. So a DPF can be £2,000. It's an expensive bit of kit to replace.
People do find when they drive small cars, they're just around towns, that EGR blocks up and they have to have an expensive replacement. I've heard, though, that if you run vehicles at 70, 75 miles an hour on the motorway, that unblocks it. Is that an old wives' tale?
No, it's true. You need to get them hot. So get them warmed up and get them run in nicely and do that often. And it's short trips are the killer. That's what causes the problem. So as long as you're getting the engine nice and warm, that is less likely to be an issue. But being in the right gear, it doesn't mean what you're wearing. This is about the gearbox.
I've never been in the right gear.
That's true. Look at what you're wearing today.
These are pajamas.
You got my dad's shirt on. But yeah, that's really important, and that's going to help you drive more efficiently. And yeah, adopting what we were talking about earlier, engine braking. So as you're approaching a hazard, I was taught to drive by my grandfather, who was a driving examiner. He was known as the major, and he failed more people than he passed. 49% of his students passed, the rest didn't. And he was formidable locally and known, as I say, as the major. And people, oh no, I've got the major. And he taught me to drive in a week. And I passed first time, as did all of our family that had him giving us the lessons. And he was formidable and a very proud advanced driver. And after I passed my test, he said, right, now I'm going to teach you to drive. And we went off for 2 weeks through a school holiday. And every day we took motorways, A roads, and I really did. We even did a skid pan. So I learned how to drive in a skid, driving backwards at speed, learning to do a J-turn. I mean, why do I need to know that? brilliant though. But then driving in the snow, if you lose control, I was able to gain control of a car. So that's where my passion for driving came from. I think is from him. So being in the right gear, really important. Approaching a roundabout, being in that hazard gear. And he always talked about third gear or second gear being a hazard gear. So changing down to that gear, the revs go up, you've got far more control over the vehicle, being in that higher revving. And you're not really using any fuel if you're just letting the engine rev to brake you.
And checking your speed is next to on the list. Number 4. I suppose if you've got your gear right, your speed's going to be right, isn't it?
Not necessarily, no. I see people changing up too early. You know, you get that horrible noise as you're in the wrong gear, you know, in fourth gear too early. And that's not good for your engine at all. So trying to work in partnership with the engine and really learn to feel when it feels right to change gear. You know, if you're putting the engine under duress, you're doing something wrong. Either you're in fourth too early or in second too late. Being in the right gear is going to make a massive difference to your fuel consumption and to your servicing costs. You know, you're not going to wear out the small end bearings or the valves, which are what causing that pinging noise.
And I suppose as well, if you're a good driver, you've driven the same vehicle for a long time, and you're, say, hopping in a motorhome for the first time, all engines are calibrated differently as far as gearing is concerned. Just get in there, drive around, and learn about the gearing for a little while before you hit the open road.
Yeah, learn to feel it. I mean, it sounds weird, but you do get a feel of when you're driving well. And if you're towing a caravan, it's going to be different again to when you're just taking the kids to school. And towing a caravan changes the dynamic of a car engine and gearbox, you know, significantly, depending on what the car is. I mean, I drive an old Range Rover, and that will tow anything. It's amazing. I mean, I can feel it on the back of the car, a caravan on the back of the car, but it doesn't really change the MPG of the car, but they're built to do it.
Now, I've heard the next one on the list before. It's number 5. I'd appreciate it if you explain to me why it makes a difference. Your tyre pressures.
It does, yeah. Well, having a tyre pressure that's too low is going to wear the tyre out much more quickly, and having it too high is going to do the same. So if you look at your tyres and look at the wear, if they're wearing out in the middle, so there's a strip in the middle that's bold, you're overinflating them. They're too high. And equally on the outer edges, the tyre's too low. Maybe you've got an inside edge that's wearing. Well, that could be the tracking or a problem with the suspension. Now, there's lots of debate and discussion around motorhome tyre pressures. You know, what should it be? And there's always a maximum pressure on the tyre wall. Now, there are some great apps online that will tell you tyre pressures. Manufacturers of the motorhome, bear in mind, of course, the van that it's built on was a van when it was built by Fiat, Peugeot, Citroën, Ford, whoever. And then a company's got hold of it and made it into a motorhome. So motorhome tyres are different to van tyres. They're often referred to as camper spec tyres. Now, they have a different tread pattern and the sidewalls are thicker. Those are the two primary differences between a campervan or motorhome spec tyre. Michelin and Continental are the two main manufacturers of them. And those are the two that I understand, and I've managed to wean two differences between that and a cheaper van tyre. Now, you could put a van tyre on your motorhome. Lots of people do. They aren't going to have the same wearability in terms of tyre wear on the sidewalls, because motorhomes sit around for long periods of time at a much fuller weight than an empty van does. So a van not being used is normally empty, therefore much lighter. A motorhome is always going to be 2.5 or 3 tons or whatever it is, and it's going to sit still for long periods. So the tyres are stronger, and the tread patterns are designed for all year use, wet, you know, cold roads, warm roads, sunny weather, and so on. The tyre pressure is really important, and that is led entirely by the weight of your motorhome. Now, that's going to vary depending on if you're a single person or a family of 6. Much like it does on your car, you've got different tyre pressures for when there's 2 people in it or when there's 6 people in it. It's the same with a motorhome. So you would need to research the weight of your motorhome and then search the make of that tyre online, and they will tell you, the manufacturer of that tyre will tell you the pressure you should run. Now, motorhome tyres tend to run at a very high pressure. People are often scared by 70 psi. You know, we're used to putting 36 in our cars. They will happily run up to 70 psi. And depending on the tyre, there will be a maximum psi on the sidewall. That doesn't mean that's the pressure you should run it at. You should run it at the right pressure for the weight of the vehicle. So do that research. Go and weigh it on a weigh bridge. Cost you a £5, and then you can find out what tyre pressure you should be running.
Switching off the aircon. Now, I remember many years ago, and it wasn't so long ago, when no cars had aircon. The last 20 years, if you haven't got aircon, you just don't buy the thing at all. But it does burn fuel.
Absolutely, they do, significantly so, as many as several miles per gallon. And we're just used to it being on, aren't we? I mean, that button that turns the aircon off, have you noticed it started to disappear?
Yes, it has.
As travel times reduce in our cars.
Or it's more difficult to find.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and some motorhomes as well have heating in the back that you can run from the engine, which is lovely for your passengers in the back. Or when you arrive, it means the back of the motorhome is lovely and warm. The challenge there, of course, is you're using fuel. So if you don't need the aircon on, you don't need the habitation area heating on, then consider turning it off.
We're doing 10 tips for greener motoring on the Motorhome Matt podcast with me, Keith Gooden, and Motorhome Matt Sims. We've reached number 7 on the list. I suppose this one seems quite obvious, isn't it? Looking after your vehicle?
It does, yeah, but how often do we remember to get it serviced? You know, new oil makes a tremendous difference to an engine. It's like lifeblood of the engine. The cost of dropping the oil and putting new in is it's insignificant, I think, compared to the value of the vehicle. And you should consider doing. I do it every year on our hire fleet. Certainly, we do it every year. The recommendation is every 2 years, or there'll be a mileage requirement, 24,000 miles. I'm personally a fan of changing the oil more often than that. Checking the brakes, checking that they're very good condition. You never know when you're going to need them, as a matter of urgency. So just keeping it serviced. Back to tyre pressures, check them. How often do you check your tyre pressures?
Well, that's very true. I mean, I do see some people in the petrol station going and checking tyre pressures of their cars. And you think, oh, that's a load of old hassle. I must do that, though. You never get around to it.
I know. It's true. It's easy not to, isn't it? Things like roof bars as well. If you've got a roof rack on the campervan or motorhome, or even bikes on the roof of your car, that's going to make a massive difference. I see people all the time driving around with a roof box on. And, and I've said to them, are you off on holiday? And, oh, no, we got the roof box on the car. Oh, yes, from last summer. And they've been driving around for 9 months, and you just see fuel burning through their pockets, That makes a massive difference to your fuel efficiency. So look after it, and it's a really sensible idea in terms of getting it serviced and maintained.
Number 8 on the list, planning your journey. I suppose the amount of miles you're doing.
Yeah, don't get lost. The number of times we've driven off, taken a wrong turn, and an hour later we're back on the route. Missing a motorway junction is really annoying, especially when there's a queue ahead. It's just planning it so you are aware of where you're going. Sat-navs, we have some real fun with. We use an app called Waze, which I love. It's a great sat-nav app, and then we've got an app on for use with your motorhome caravan journey, and that's one of them. But it does take us down some random roads.
Yeah, sat-navs do tend to assume that you're driving a Cinquecento, don't they, when it comes to the size of the road?
Well, some you can plot the size of the vehicle you're in, which are great, which is dead handy in a motorhome or with a caravan. That's really important. But it is taking some time before you hit go. That green button on the screen is actually look at where's it taking you, and just plan your route based on what you want to see. And do you want to travel on the motorway, or do you want to stick to the A roads? And just take some time to plan it. And again, it will have an impact on your pocket.
Yeah, and that sat-nav will have a range of different routes that it can provide for you at just a press of a button.
Indeed,
You don't have to take the first one.
And if you don't want to use the motorway, then make sure you tick the box that don't use the motorway.
Yeah, the sat-nav usually plans your journey for the shortest amount of time, not necessarily the shortest amount of miles.
That's true. Yeah, toll's the same. If you don't want to pay a toll, then tick the box that says no toll roads.
Number 9 in our list, switching it off. Isn't that obvious? You switch it off when you arrive at your destination.
Yeah, you do, of course. Well, though not necessarily. I mean, in a motorhome, you might turn it on to charge the battery in the habitation area. So a leisure battery is recharged off the engine, and if it's gone flat, you need to get charge into it. If you haven't got an electric hookup to plug into, then you would rely on the engine battery to recharge the leisure battery. But so often we see just vehicles sat there with the engine idling. That is using fuel unnecessarily. And if you're in a long traffic jam, don't be afraid to turn it off. Modern cars can I say modern? Hate that word. But newer cars have start-stop technology. Yours has got it.
Yeah, it's an extra little battery. And
Yeah.
when you reach traffic lights, the engine will switch off.
That's right.
And when you first get a vehicle like that, it's a bit disconcerting. But then when you press the clutch down,
It starts.
It starts.
Yeah, we'll turn the steering wheel. There's lots of things that will trigger. Sometimes they come on their own because the heating in the vehicle kicks in. Ours does that. And it's thinking, why have you started? I haven't done anything. But it's just the heating's kicked in and it needs some more power. But if you don't have that, and even if you do, you can still turn it off. But remember, of course, the act of restarting it without using a start-stop starter motor, you do need to think about how long you need to drive it to recharge the battery. So if you're going to keep stop, start, and you haven't got stop, start, your starter battery is going to be put through its paces, and you could flatten it without driving for half an hour.
Absolutely, because I said with the stop-start technology in vehicles, it is an additional battery.
Third battery, as an extra battery.
Under the bonnet.
I say third, but I'm thinking about a motorhome. But
yeah, you are. Yeah, which is what you do. Think about motorhomes.
All the time. I lie there at night. I don't count sheep. I count eldest motorhomes.
You should see the magazines under his bed. We're doing top 10 tips for greener motoring on the Motorhome Map podcast. The last one, you've cheated a bit here because it's not one, you've got 4 in here, so it should be 14 tips.
You only gave me 10.
Can you take us through them then for the 10th?
Well, we talked about turning your aircon off, but actually consider closing your windows. So you shouldn't drive a motorhome or caravan with the windows open in the back. People do drive with the roof lights open. I understand why. They've either forgotten or they've opened it because it's hot in the back. I get that. But what will invariably happen is you'll arrive and the roof light has taken a leave of absence. You've left it on the M6. It's blown off. So closing them is a good idea, but closing the windows in the cab is also a good idea. That will affect the aerodynamic nature of the vehicle as it passes through the road and down the road at whatever speed you're going. So consider closing those. At slow speed, not a problem, but at high speed, definitely worth closing your windows.
So what else should we be thinking about? When you're parked up, why should you face the sunrise?
Well, I read this somewhere. I can't remember where I saw this. I thought that's a genius idea. And I actually do this in the winter at home. So park your vehicle, and you do this in the car, facing the sunrise, assuming you want to get in the car in the morning. And if it's frosty, your car will thaw out without using the heater in the car. Isn't that clever?
That is good thinking.
It's a genius idea. And I do it at home. I park the other way around when I know it's going to be frosty. And sure enough, come out in the morning, my car's thawed out. The neighbour scratching it with his credit card.
And of course, the sunset is at the back of your motorhome as well, so you can sit there with your glass of wine enjoying it.
Sit and enjoy it, absolutely. But of course, if you're away in the winter, you've got the heating on it, so it's not going to freeze anyway. But the other factor then, conversely, is I know this as a seasoned motorhomer. We wake up and open the blinds around the windscreen, and we've basically got Niagara Falls on the windscreen on the inside, all the condensation.
Yes.
So a knack we've learned is prior to departure. So on a day we're moving on, we will open those blinds early, and we have had to resort to a tea towel or even a Karcher, like a windscreen sucker. Do you know what I mean? Like one of those blades, and it sucks the water off. They're a really clever idea, although you have to be careful when you use them because you can tip the water out. But being mindful of that is a really good idea, and get that cleared before you want to drive off. Otherwise, you're sat there with the engine ticking over, blowing hot air all over the windscreen, trying to dry it. And another thing to be aware of with the water on the windscreen, if your airbag sensor module is below the windscreen, which it is on many Ford Transit or Fiat Ducato vans, I don't know which models off the top of my head, but be mindful that water can run down the windscreen and can cause that to fail, giving you an airbag light. And it can cause other electrical issues. The lights stay on. Lots of random things happen. So that water runs down the windscreen into the ECU or the airbag module and can cause complications. So a way to stop that is to use silver screens on the outside of the vehicle, keep you warm at night, and will minimise, it won't eliminate, but they definitely do help minimise the water on the inside of your windscreen. I didn't expect to talk about that today.
The very last thing in our top 10 tips for greener motoring, We've talked about gearing earlier on and getting in the right gear, but you've got here changing gear earlier. You've added down the bottom of the list.
Yeah, just don't be lazy with the gearbox. Again, it's about learning the rev range of the vehicle, and just don't rev it too hard. There's no need to. Get it warm, certainly, and if you want to rev it hard, then fine. But it's costing you money, so just consider if you're in a flow of traffic, you can maintain and make good progress by changing gear a little earlier. As an advanced motorcyclist, we're taught to ride in the middle third of the rev range of the bike. Now that's about keeping control of the vehicle. Now, when I first started doing this, I was criticised for changing up through the gearbox too quickly, and I was keeping the revs down because I thought that was sensible. And then my instructor said, no, you want to get it up into the middle third of the rev range. Now that definitely uses more fuel, but on a motorbike, of course, that's a bit different. That's about keeping control of it, and it's a very different vehicle to driving a motorhome. If you're in a set of twisty bends, like we were on the weekend driving around Snowdon area, then being up in the gearbox was really good. I wasn't using the brakes. I was able to use the engine, and I was able to keep much closer control of we were in a VW camper, and it was brilliant. Manual gearbox, I had complete control. But consider, if you're on a motorway, getting up through the gearbox, and remember, if you've got a sixth gear, to use it. It's so easy to forget because fifth gear is pretty comfortable. If you've got a sixth gear, remember to use it. Fuel efficiency up, and money down.
That's why the sixth gear is there, is for fuel efficiency, is it?
It is, yeah.
Well, that's it, our 10 tips for greener motoring. Thanks very much, Matt.
You're welcome.
For this one. What should people do? Little buttons they should press for YouTube to get the ding, ding, ding.
Well, if you're watching on YouTube, then please hit the subscribe button and the little bell, and then the gods of YouTube will tell you when we've got a new episode coming out. Remember to follow us on Instagram. You'll find us at motorhomematt.co.uk, and on Facebook, we're Motorhome Matt too.
We'll be back for another podcast next week.